Really appreciate everyone joining. We had our first webinar at the end of last year, and it went really well, and we really appreciate everyone's participation in that one. And Dr. Padiath has joined us again because he was very well received in that conversation. We thank him for joining us once again here today. Really, the kind of the discussion we'd love to have with everyone is about the ADLD Research Hub, which Samina will get into in a second. The agenda or the conversation we'll have today is just a very brief overview of the ADLD Center. If you want to learn more in more detail, there is the video on the ADLD Center YouTube channel that describes in detail the kind of work that we're engaged in. But really today, it's about the exciting announcement of the ADLD Research Hub, what that is, the importance of doing this work, which Dr. Padiath, a key partner of ours, will get into. And then Samina, Prithika, and Catherine will talk about an overview of the patient registry, the registration process, and then also do a live demo. At the end, Bishan will kind of moderate a Q&A session similar to last time. So with that being said, just a quick overview of what we're engaged in at the ADLD Center, and then I'll turn it over to Samina about the ADLD Research Hub. So we're focused on three key things, right? The three key areas. One is patients and caregivers. The second is research. And then the third is just generally partnerships and fundraising to conduct the first two activities. And really, we started in 2019, but largely became very active in operations last year in 2021, with the goal of kind of building this community of patients that are very disparate and unconnected today. How do we bring everybody together, both to build that community, to talk about potential treatments and lifestyle management, but also to drive research on a path to treatment for the future. And so a key part of that is A, bringing everybody together, but B, then establishing this patient registry such that we can have a united voice when we talk to scientists and clinicians and pharmaceutical companies. It really helps us drive this united voice together. The second piece around research, there's a number of folks, including Dr. Padiath and Dr. Radhi and others that have been involved in researching ADLD for some time. We've put some additional focus as an organization on this since we got started. We've raised funds, a few $100,000 we've raised for research. We've partnered with the Orphan Disease Center at the University of Pennsylvania to release an application for grants at the end of this year. So in November, we'll be announcing a grant opportunity of approximately $50,000 to $100,000, depending on the applications. And so we're really pushing forward with research to understand the disease better and how we can drive towards treatment. But with that being said, we'll jump straight into the ADLD Research Center. I'll hand it over to Samina. She's a primary care physician in Pennsylvania, and she's the co-head of the patient engagement group at the ADLD Center.
Thank you, Nirpal. So I want to introduce the ADLD Research Hub, which is very exciting. This is our patient registry. A little bit about a patient registry. So it's a method of gathering patients and collecting data to better understand their experience with ADLD. And this is going to enable us to reach our goal of really launching a natural history study now and eventually clinical trials in the future. So what exactly is a natural history study, you may be wondering. It seeks to really learn how a disease affects a person over a lifetime in order to gain new understandings and help guide opportunities for treatment. So information collected can include diagnosis and treatment, testing samples, imaging studies, reports from clinicians, and information from patients about their quality of life. So that's the stuff that we're going to be collecting as part of our registry, which is the ADLD Patient Hub. Next slide, please. Research Hub, sorry. So the importance of this, so in addition to the focus on collecting data for research, the registry is a place for patients, caregivers, and family members to really share information about their needs, and that can help us set the agenda for further ADLD research. So this is a community effort where every voice is essential. Whether someone's just been diagnosed, has been living with the condition for years, or is a family member or caregiver of an ADLD patient, the invaluable experience that they bring can really help us better understand how to support ADLD patients and family members in the future. The ADLD patients from all over the world are invited to participate in the ADLD Research Hub and contribute data over time. So we aim to create an active international community of patients, family members, and researchers in order to help drive ADLD research forward. So the registry is open to patients who can enter their own data for themselves or have help from someone to enter data on their behalf, as well as it's open to caregivers and family members who can share their experience in the registry directly and help shape our research agenda. Next slide. The registry is a partnership between the ADLD Center, the ADLD community, Luna, which is our technology platform that houses the survey, and Genetic Alliance, which is the organization that specializes in registry design. Our registry is intended to grow over time. It's not going to be a one and done. So we plan to launch activities in stages based on the needs that are identified through the registry by patients, family members, and caregivers, as well as the needs of our researchers. So this is a project that will grow with the community, and we really want you to join now to be a part of the path to treatment for ADLD. Thank you.
Yeah, just to highlight a key point, as we started the ADLD Center a couple of years ago, we went in and talked to about 20 plus different patient advocacy groups. And we went to learn from them, some of them 2 years ahead of them, 2 years ahead of us, some of them 10 years ahead of us. And so without fail, what they all said was there are three things, two key initial steps you have to do, right? One is to bring the patients together, both to understand their needs and help them build a community together. And then the second is to start a natural history study so we can clinically track them to understand the development of the disease. And so this is a critical first step, because what these patient groups that we are learning from have then been able to do is have very real conversations with pharmaceutical companies and have driven towards actual treatments because they have a united voice from a set of patients that are driving, advocating together. And so that's why this piece is so important for us and why we're so excited about bringing this together at this time. Dr. Badaev, who joined us last time, he's a professor, associate professor in the Department of Human Genetics and Neurobiology at the University of Pittsburgh. He's the one that originally identified the duplication of lamin B1, the gene, as the genetic cause for autosomal dominant leukodystrophy, or ADLD. Very accomplished in the field with numerous renowned publications, and he's been personally a very close partner and friend now, helping guide us through this path. And so, Quasar, as you know, we're very thankful for your ongoing partnership, and thank you for joining us today.
Okay, thank you so much, Inderpal, and it's always great to be here. Always happy to support the ADLD Center. As Inderpal has said, I realize now I've been working on ADLD for more than 15 years now. I can't imagine it's been so long. I know many of you, and I'm really happy that a lot of you are here. So the objective of what I'm going to be doing now is just, again, very briefly give you an overview of the disease. I know we had gone over this the last time, but I think this will be important for you to kind of give you some context on the research, but also then towards the end, mostly focus on why it's so important to have this patient registry and how it's kind of a bridge between the basic research that we do and a lot of the clinical research, which I think is of the most relevance to you as a patient. Right. So again, we all know autosomal dominant leukodystrophy, or ADLD, is a neurological disorder, which means it affects the brain and spinal cord, right? And it's a particular class of neurological disorder. It's called leukodystrophy because the region of the brain that's really affected is this region known as the white matter. And this is the region that's enriched in myelin, right? And myelin makes it look white. And that's why when you have loss of myelin, it's known as a loss of the white matter or a leukodystrophy, right? And as we had discussed earlier, myelin is really kind of a covering for your nerves and helps you conduct nerve impulses very rapidly. And without that, you have a lot of problems for your nerves to conduct impulses properly. And that leads to a lot of different issues like movement disorders and other things which are kind of symptoms of ADLD. Again, I won't kind of go through this in great detail. Most of ADLD patients start with some form of what we call as autonomic dysfunction. Usually they have bladder or bowel abnormalities, and that then progresses to muscle weaknesses and difficulty in walking. And then towards the end, you can also have some cognitive dysfunction. And in all cases, the most important diagnostic tool has been the MRI. So this is a patient on the left. I don't know if you can see my pointer, with ADLD, and you can see this really intense white region here. Paradoxically, when you see more white here, that actually means there's a loss of white matter. Whereas you see the same region from a normal individual, you do not see such an intense white here. And so, an experienced neurologist looking at these MRIs will very clearly say that, look, this is a leukodystrophy. And now that we have the genetic diagnosis, they will be able to say very clearly that this is ADLD. One of the things I want to kind of really emphasize that we've now identified ADLD patients from pretty much all over the world, multiple different countries. And this is obviously going to be an underestimate of the number of patients there are. These are just the number of patients that we already know about. And you can see that they're from everywhere. They're from the US, Europe, India, Africa, everywhere, Australia. A question I get all the time is, is it like ADLD specific for some ethnic group in some countries? That's not the case. It seems to be there all over the world. So I think that's really important. As Inderpal was saying, ADLD is a genetic disorder. It's actually caused by a mutation in a single gene on chromosome 5. That's this chromosome here, right? So what happens in ADLD is that, so all of us have 2 copies of a gene. What happens in ADLD is that on one of these chromosomes, there's an extra copy of this gene, and this gene is known as lamin B1. And that extra copy is known as something known as a duplication. So ADLD patients have 3 copies of lamin B1, that's 1, 2, 3, versus normal individuals that have 2 copies. After that, the group in Italy, our colleagues in Italy identified another subset of ADLD patients which have what is known as a deletion upstream of the lamin B1 gene. But for all practical purposes, they have a very, very similar disease. There's small differences, but they have a very similar disease. What is lamin B1? Lamin B1 is a gene which codes for a protein. And this protein forms these filaments here. And the filaments make up what is known as the nucleus of the cell. And think of it as like a structural, as a kind of scaffold for the nucleus. So they provide structural integrity to the nucleus. Just like in a building, you have these iron bars that provide the structural integrity to the concrete. Just like that, you have these lamin B1 filaments that provide the integrity to the nucleus. So once we identify the gene, it was very confusing because there was no obvious connection between this gene and the brain. This protein is present everywhere. So some of the important basic questions we are trying to understand with the disease is, why does more amount of this specific protein, lamin B1, which is expressed in all cells, cause a demyelinating disease, right? The duplication or the deletion is present from birth. So it's transmitted from an affected individual to their children, right? Why do they get the disease only much later on, right? Why does this lamin B1 cause demyelination, right? If more amount of lamin B1 is the cause of the disease, can we then target it as a kind of treatment? And obviously, can we find drugs that reduce lamin B1 levels? So just very briefly, the kind of work that we do is we rely on cells from ADLD patients. So it's very important to interact with them. We rely on brain tissue from ADLD patients. We've also started working with mice. So we have made mice that have the same mutation as the ADLD patients, so kind of the same mutation. And these mice show a very similar disease to the ADLD patients. And this is a mouse that's about a year old, which is kind of maybe 50 or 60 in terms of human years. And you can see this mouse has difficulty in walking. It's kind of has a hunched phenotype. And these mice also unfortunately die much earlier than a regular mice at about the same age. So we have a good model for this disease, right? And this model is really helpful for us to understand how the disease works and also to test potential drugs that we have. Okay, so just to talk about treatments, because one of the things I wanted to emphasize is that more than any other time in the past, I think it's really exciting now because we do have the potential for developing drugs for neurological diseases like ADLD. If you had asked me this question 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have said that, I don't see anything in the horizon, but now there are potential therapies. And it's really now, and when we talk about the clinical registry, I'll talk over the patient registry. That's why it's really important now to be able to get patients together, because it's not that there might be no treatment. There are potential treatments that might be there in the future. In our lab, we are looking at two approaches, mostly focusing on reducing lamin B1 levels. One is an approach using a kind of molecules known as antisense oligonucleotides. And these molecules have actually now been moved into the clinic. So they're actually now being used to treat diseases. And we are also screening for compounds that will reduce lamin B1 levels. And my colleagues in Italy, Elisa Giorgio, is also doing kind of having a similar approach. So let's just go to this, and this is what's really important, right? So a lot of the work that we do now is doing stuff in the lab, trying to understand the mechanisms of the disease, trying to understand how does disease work so that we can identify targets that we can use for therapy, right? At the other end of the spectrum are the clinical trials, where if you've identified a particular drug or if you've identified a particular pathway, you want to now test it in patients, right? Now, the main kind of the link that's missing here now is this stuff in the middle, right? This is where essentially you have a collection of patients, you have data from patients, which allow you to use the information that's been developed in the lab and move to clinical trials, because that's really where we want to go for ADLD, right? We want to be able to start multiple clinical trials, both to understand how the disease is progressing in patients and also to test potential therapies, right? So the major missing link has been these things, this ADLD patient registry, these natural histories, essentially getting patients together and understanding and analyzing their disease progression and seeing how we can link that and move that to clinical trials. So that's really where the patient registry comes, right? So as Inderpal was mentioning, this is a critical, a vital, a piece that you have to be able to move forward. Right? If we do not have this, there's absolutely no way that we can move into clinical trials. All that will happen is that we'll just continue to do work in the lab. None of that work will be able to be moved into the clinic, right? So a patient registry is really, really important, right? And it's specifically important for a disease like ADLD. Now, ADLD is an ultra rare disease, right? What that means is that there are not going to be a huge number of individuals who have this disease, right? So it's not like diabetes or hypertension where you have 100,000 or 1 million people suffering from the disease, right? As a result of that, what happens is you have patients that are in different parts of the world. Each of them is seen by a separate doctor. Many times, these doctors have never even seen an ADLD patient before. So they have absolutely no idea on how to move forward, right? What the patient registry does is bring all these different experiences together in one central resource, which can be easily accessed by researchers and clinicians, right? So that once this happens, the next time a new ADLD patient is identified, the doctor can go and say, okay, this is a resource, and this gives me information how to move forward, right? Collecting this patient registry allows us to do what is known as a natural history study. Okay, we can understand how the disease progresses. Okay, because one of the things we've identified is that although you might have the mutation, and the other thing I wanted to emphasize is that because of all the work we've done in the lab, there's a very robust genetic test for it, right? So if you have clinical symptoms of ADLD, you can very, very clearly identify whether you have the mutation or not, right? The genetic test is extremely works really well. Right? So if you have that, what we've seen is even if patients have the same kind of mutation, Some patients progress more, some patients progress less, some people get symptoms at different stages or ages. So we don't know why that is, right? So a patient registry can actually put all that information together and help us ask these kinds of questions. Why is it that some people, deteriorate faster? Why is it that some people do better, right? Are they getting certain kinds of treatments that are helping? Maybe there are some treatments that don't help at all, right? Now, all these questions right now are unanswerable because we just don't have that information, right? So getting all this information into a central location is so critical, right? And when we have that, we can actually now do stuff that is really helpful to the patient in terms of improving patient quality of life, right? So maybe there are certain kinds of, behavior, certain kinds of occupational therapies or certain kinds of physiotherapies that can help the patient progress, right? And these can then be disseminated back to the patient community and saying, okay, once you've analyzed all this data, we see that, if you do this, this helps. So maybe this is something that can be included as part of the standard care for ADLD patients. Right now, because patients are seen as individual entities or individual patients at different places, there is really no standardized care for ADLD. And this is what a clinical or a patient registry will help us do, right? So that's the first step. After that, if we want, let's say that in the lab, you identify a drug that works really well in the mice, that works really well in the cell, right? The only way to move forward with that is to do a clinical trial in patients. And unless you have a certain number of patients who have already been followed, there is no way you can start that clinical trial, right? So unless we have a patient registry, we cannot try any kind of drug treatment, right? Because it's very difficult to if you have a drug, to treat it in one patient and see what happens, and then you treat some, you need to have a standardized format for treating this, right? And that's what a clinical trial is. And for to have that clinical trial, you have to have this patient registry. And like Inderpal was also mentioning, it's really important. So like I said, this is an ultra rare disease. There aren't, there are probably maybe 1,000 individuals or maybe a little more who have this disease, right? Unless we can show drug companies that that certain market exists, there is no way, unfortunately, it's a matter of economics for them. There is no way that they're going to invest the amount of money or time in in developing a drug, right? So as a basic researcher, we can identify a target, we can identify a drug, but really moving that drug forward into something that is actually a pill that you can take or an injection that you can take is actually in the drug companies. We cannot do that at an academic setting, right? So to be able to move or jump into that next level, you have to have a patient registry to be able to convince drug companies. I'm going to stop there, Inderpal, and I think that's a good kind of platform if people have questions to kind of move forward. And I think that's a good way to transition to the actual patient registry itself.
Thank you so much, Kwasar. Very, very clear as always, and again, thank you for all your help over the past couple of years getting to this point, and then helping us drive this forward as well. Want to thank and unfortunately send regrets on behalf of Dr. Cortelli from Italy, who was scheduled to be here today and had a last-minute urgent conflict. And so we look forward to having him on an upcoming webinar as well. We are going to head into a little bit of an explanation on the Patient Registry and Research Hub in more detail. One thing that I'll mention again for those that have joined a little bit in is that we'll have a Q&A after this next session. There's going to be an explanation and a demo of the patient registry we have set up, as Dr. Padayath had mentioned. Incredibly, incredibly important for us to start building out our patient information in here for use in research and later with pharmaceutical companies. But after this next session, we'll have a Q&A session. If you have any questions that you prefer to ask anonymously, you can just use the Zoom chat and send them. With that, I'll turn it over to Catherine and Prithika, as well as Samina, who you've met. So Catherine is the Director of People-Centered Research at Genetic Alliance, one of our partners, where she works with organizations like the ADLD Center to launch registries and research studies together with community members. Thanks for joining, Catherine. And as well, Prithika, who's a dental professional in Minnesota and is co-head of the patient engagement group at the ADLD Center, along with Samina. So thanks for joining as well, Pritika.
Thanks so much, Inderpal. I'll go ahead and pull up the slides, and then Pritika will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Catherine. Now that we've heard about what the patient registry does, what the purpose is, what we hope to achieve through it, I'm sure you all are eager to sign up. So I'm going to just get into the nuts and bolts of it and just go through the process of how you can sign up. So the easiest way is to visit the ADLD website. Like Inderpal mentioned, it has a lot of information on what we do, about our work, and resources on research that's already been done, plus, of course, information on the ADLD Research Hub. So once you get into the ADLD Research Hub webpage, there's information about the process. And you might not remember everything that's been said in this webinar, so that webpage provides a very good overview, and you can go back and review all the information. Once you're ready to sign up, the webpage will direct you to the Luna platform, and you can create an account on Luna. And Samina mentioned earlier that the registry is open to patients and caregivers. So you can create an account for yourself if you're an individual diagnosed with ADLD and share your experience. Caregivers can also create their own account and share experiences about themselves as a caregiver and their challenges. Another option we have is for caregivers to create an account on behalf of patients who are unable to do it themselves. This could be due to, if they don't have access to technology, or due to physical disability, they're not able to enter information themselves, or also for patients who are deceased and no longer with us. So it's a very helpful tool to gather more information about experiences of more patients. Once your account is created, you will be asked to review and agree to the platform consent. This covers your privacy concerns. Your data stays on Luna unless you give us permission to share it. You can delete your data, revoke your consent at any time. And your personal information is protected. We're very serious about that, and we never share it with anyone without your, without your permission. Once the consent is done, you are now able to join the ADLD Research Hub Start Here study. It's pretty simple at this time. We are asking you to complete 3 activities. One is a demographic survey. Second is your survey about your experience with ADLD, whether as a caregiver or as a patient. And there's an option to connect your electronic health records. At this time, we're not asking for any identifiable information, so your privacy is protected. Luna will automatically block any identifiable information from your electronic health records at this time. And I want to focus on the start here part of this study. This is really where we're starting off. We're getting to know our community. We're getting to know your needs, your priorities, what your challenges are. And this is going to help us find a focus for our efforts and carve a path forward. So stay tuned. More is going to come in the future based on what we learn from the information you share on these surveys. We'll introduce more activities and more surveys in the future, and that's gonna help us eventually get to a path to research to find cure. And I also want to mention that, again, when I look at the word start here, when I started with the ADLD journey, this was about a couple of decades ago, the term ADLD wasn't even available. And now we are at a point where we have a genetic test to confirm it. So the progress that we've made, in my opinion, is huge. And so I hope that, you know, we can spread the word and reach out to other families that you know of, reach out to your providers, ask them to talk to more people. The idea is to gather more patients, and so we can build a community that's bigger and stronger. So thank you very much. I'll hand it over to Catherine now, and she'll go over privacy and the live demo.
Thank you so much, Pritika, for that overview and that call to action. I did want to talk just a bit more about the privacy and security piece. As Enderpaul and Samina mentioned earlier, I work with Genetic Alliance. We're an organization that works with communities like the ADLD Center to help launch patient registries. We are very serious about privacy and security and about making sure that people have control of their data when participating in research. And this is something that matters very much to the ADLD community as well. So I just want to speak a little bit about what you can expect with the registry and how that works. The registry is built on the Luna platform, who is very serious about privacy and security. You know, they have the highest standards for implementing that. They're also committed to making sure that you as patients, caregivers, just as participants in this registry, control the information that you share. You decide what information you share. You can delete your data at any time. You can revoke your consent to participate in research at any time. You're always in control of how the information you share with the registry is used. Your data stays inside of the Luna platform unless you provide explicit consent to share it elsewhere. At this time, we don't have any requests for it to go outside of the Luna platform. In the future, there may be researchers who want to do that, but you'll get to decide how that happens. So what that means is that you are always connected to your data. You're always maintaining that control of your information that you're sharing. And you also decide whether or not to share information that could be used to identify you. Right now, we're not collecting any information that could be used in that way. We might in the future to support clinical trials. Sometimes it's very important to collect things like genetic information that might be able to identify somebody if, you know, it was kind of used in the wrong way, or, you know, things like contact information to follow up about clinical trial opportunities. If and when we are looking to collect that information in the ADLD Research Hub, you'll be able to decide whether or not to share that information, but you also have the option to participate without sharing that too. And at this time, we're not collecting any of that identifiable info. So just to say, you know, we're really committed to making sure that this information is kept safe. We know how sensitive it is, both at Genetic Alliance and in the ADLD community. And it's why giving you control of that information and how it's used is so important. And if you've got any more questions about that, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat and we can get to them during the Q&A. For now, though, I'll go ahead and switch gears. I'm actually going to show you what the registry looks like. I think you've heard us talking about it long enough, and it's time to see it in action. So just give me a moment to pull up my screen.
And I'll just make a couple of related points while you pull up your screen. The first is, as everyone, Samina, Catherine, and Prithika mentioned, this is the first survey of a couple that will come out over time, just so that the researchers can learn more, as Quasar had mentioned, Dr. Bediath had mentioned. So it'll be an ongoing journey. It's really important as a way that patients and their caregivers can really take control of driving towards an outcome, right? Without, as Dr. Bediath mentioned, without the collective kind of information from ADLD patients, we're not going to be able to make progress on finding a treatment. So really just another call to and a plea to let's all come together as a community. You know, personally, my family's affected. A number of folks on here, you and your families are affected. And so if we pull together and bring this information together, that's the way we're going to be able to drive towards a treatment. So just wanted to kind of reiterate that point as we headed into the demo and then into Q&A.
All right, so I have up on my screen the webpage on the ADLD Center website. It's password protected right now, but you'll be able to access it directly after this webinar. And as Pritika mentioned, there's a lot of information here about the registry. If you need to refer back to, any of the things we've just been talking about, why we're doing this, to bring the ADLD community together, to improve our understanding of ADLD, to start driving towards natural history studies, you can find all of that information here. There's an option to sign up as a patient, as well as an option to sign up as a caregiver on a patient's behalf. Today, I'm going to show you the flow to sign up as a patient, but you can go in either direction, depending on which is the right fit for you. If you are a caregiver who's not entering information about somebody else, but you want to enter information about your own experience, that's also an option. So I'll go ahead and click through here. All right, so you'll see the screen that says welcome to Luna. It's a partnership between Luna and the ADLD Center. This little message about thank you for joining the ADLD Research Hub. And right after you register, you'll be going into that ADL Research Hub Start Here study, the first study in the Research Hub. You'll be asked to enter your email address and to create a password. And while I'm entering this, just so you know, none of the information that you enter to create your account is associated with your research data. It's stored separately inside of the system. So all of this information, that's connected to you and to your identity, this is not going to be shared with the personal information you're providing about your health. This is stored separately from any research data. Once you've entered your information, you'll choose from one of these buttons, whether to create an account for yourself or to create an account to manage what's called a minor or ward. If you are a patient who's entering information about your experience with ADLD, you'll create an account for yourself. If you are a caregiver who's entering information on behalf of an ADLD patient, what you'll do is make an account to manage a ward account. We'll have some videos showing how to do that on the website. Very similar flow, just a little different, but we won't get too much further into that today. And then if you're a caregiver who's not necessarily entering information on behalf of an ADLD patient, but you'd like to share something about your own experience, make sure that you're kind of expressing your needs so that we can use that to develop the ADLD research agenda. In that case, you can also follow this flow to create an account for yourself. So I'll go ahead and click the button here. What happens next is I'll get an email notification in my inbox from Luna. I've got my email already up here, but you'll need to navigate to it during the account creation process. And you'll see this message here that looks like this, just hello, please verify your email address. And that's from noreply@lunadna.com. You'll click this button to confirm your email. And then you'll be asked to set up two-factor authentication. It should look really familiar from things like online banking, social media accounts, that kind of thing. This is a really standard form of web security these days. You'll receive a text code sent to your phone number. If for any reason you don't have a phone number that can receive text, you can also create what's called a Google Voice number. We'll be able to help you with that. The folks on the patient engagement team at ADLD Center, you can just contact us if you need that support. And then once you've entered the code, you'll also be given these recovery codes. Make sure you save these and put them in a safe place. You can write them down. You can save them in a note on your computer. These are just a way for you to access your account if you should somehow lose access to your telephone. And then like Pritika was saying, once you've finished creating the account, you'll come on through into the platform where you'll be able to review the consent for the platform. So that consent is right here. We currently have the consent available in English. There's also an Italian version. We'll have more languages coming in the future with some support from Luna. At this time, though, the surveys themselves are only in English, but we're very interested in working with the community to expand that as we go forward. You'll see a few bullets here. These should look familiar from what Pritika was talking about earlier, just kind of the basics of how Luna is protecting information, how they ensure that you have control of your data. You can also read the full Luna consent here. Once you've reviewed the document, you'll click Confirm Consent. If you're doing this on behalf of a ward account, entering data for someone else, you'll have the opportunity to provide consent for that ward. And then you'll be directed into the study. So it'll ask you to choose an experience. You can either do the assisted walkthrough or the study overview. Our study is pretty simple, so I'm just going to click through into the study overview, but you can use either view if you'd like to. You'll see a little bit of information just about this first study and what's included. As we were talking about, the information shared in this study is going to be used to better understand the needs of the ADLD community and to support research to improve quality of life and discover new treatments. It'll also help to drive towards that natural history study. Everybody can participate, so ADLD patients, caregivers entering information on behalf of those patients, or caregivers and family members entering information about their own experience. Just make sure though, if you are managing multiple accounts, to keep track of which account you're in when you're entering information. If you're in a patient account, you'll take the patient surveys, but if you're in a caregiver account, entering information about your experience as a caregiver, you'll want to take the caregiver surveys. So I'll go ahead and join the study so you can see what it's like. All right. And then all of the content for the study will load below here, or if you're doing the assisted walkthrough, it'll take you step by step through what to do. We don't have any additional consents required for this study, so nothing to do here. This is all covered by the platform consent we saw earlier. There's no what are called prerequisites to participate. This study is open to every single person in the ADLD community. And then you'll see the data requests, so the surveys and other activities that Pritika was talking about down here. We have one survey for patients about the patient experience of ADLD. We have a second survey for caregivers about the caregiver experience of ADLD. And we have a little participation requirement set up for each of these just to make sure that we help you find the right survey to take. So because I'm here in an account that's set up to represent me as a patient entering information for myself, I'm going to want to enter information into this patient experience survey. It says not qualified because I haven't met the participation requirement yet. But if I click this view button here, it'll ask me to confirm whether I'm an ADLD patient or a caregiver entering information on behalf of an ADLD patient. So I can click yes here, submit, and then I'll be qualified to take that survey. You can also see those other two surveys that Pritika mentioned. There's the demographics survey. This is open to everybody, as well as the option to connect electronic health records. And again, we're keeping it really simple at this point. There's just these 3 activities. All of them are pretty short. We'll be adding lots of new activities, including surveys that start to drive towards that natural history study, as well as surveys that address some of the needs that you identify in this first survey too over time. So please stay tuned. There will be lots more to come. This is just the beginning. And since we've got maybe another minute or two before I need to hand this over to Bishan, I'll just show you really quickly what the survey looks like. You don't need to complete the survey all in one go. I think you'll be able to because it's pretty short and simple, but if you want to, you can come back and complete these different activities at a later date too. In the patient survey, we'll ask you to confirm whether you're entering information about yourself or entering information on behalf of someone else. In this example, I'm entering my own information. We'll ask you to confirm that you've been diagnosed by ADLD. And then we'll ask you a few more questions about that diagnosis, about symptoms and treatments, as well as about your family history of ADLD. So that is the first survey. We'll be doing lots more as we go, as we've all been saying. I'm glad you all got to see this with us today. And if you've got any questions about the sign-up process, please feel free to ask them today or to reach out to registry@adld.center. I'll go ahead and stop there. And Inderpal, we'll hand it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Catherine. Appreciate that fantastic overview. We're going to head into Q&A. First, just a quick thank you to everybody for coming today. We have over 40 people on the webinar. It's fantastic to see from, you know, where we were just a few short years ago to have a couple back-to-back webinars with 40 or so people on them, with just fantastic engagement throughout. So if you haven't already, go to adld.center and sign up for the newsletter. You'll get regular updates. There's quarterly, and then a number of people reach out in between. So on the registry, as Catherine mentioned, there's registry at adld.center, and then a more general info at adld.center. If you have any questions or concerns or thoughts, or we've had a couple of people reach out to volunteer, all of that is fantastic, and we really, really appreciate it. So adld.center and sign up for the newsletter if you haven't. We will be sending out a link to the registry along with this video to everybody that joined the webinar today as well. And you should feel free to share that with others you know that couldn't join. Appreciate everybody's time and look forward to hearing from you.